Good morning. This is We're Next Radio Judgment Day, and my volume seems to be a little bit on the low side. Let's see if we can boost it up a little bit. Maybe that's a bit better. Let's have a look at that. That's better. Now, listen, my shit detector has been going full blast ever since it was announced that there was going to be an attack against Gaza in retaliation to an attack against, I suppose you call them visitors to Israel who could come to some rave or whatever that was held right next to the borders with Gaza. And it provoked a sort of an attack from the people who I am being assured were set up by Israel, called Hamas. There's already been talk. I made mention right back in the first place about some witness that had been interviewed, and they were saying yes, they all came in and they were all dressed as like Jew soldiers, and we thought we were safe. All this business, and then they were all taken away. Now, then we have to go through the business of hearing all the tales about who was killed and who wasn't killed. There's 260 being held. Now we hear there's 260 already been killed. And the whole business is, it's ongoing. And the Jews haven't shown the slightest disinclination to bombing Gaza. It just doesn't seem to have bothered them in any way whatsoever. So whether there's 260 Jew prisoners, or they're not all Jews apparently, there's all sorts of people down there, but they're all being held captive, and presumably that means they're in serious danger, I'd say. But it's... And needless to say, the whole world is jumping up and down, saying, oh my goodness, look what's happening in Gaza. Right now, there's all these Jews all lined up and they're all ready to go. They're saying, yes, we're getting ready. They got all our top boys in there and we're going to destroy this place and get the job done. And there's people in Israel saying, yes, we've got to get rid of them all together. They've all got to go. They're animals, they're this, they're that, they're everything. Well, all right, okay. And the fact that all this started back in 1948, when 750,000 of these people were driven out into concentration camps, that's all forgotten. None of that counts. No, all that matters is what is happening to Jews right now. Well, you see, I'd like you to just cast your mind back just a few days in Canada. An old man, a 98-year-old man, stood up in court, and he was presented as somebody who'd fought back against the Russians during the war. And he's been, the guy's had to go into a bloody air raid shelter somewhere to keep himself safe ever since, because the entire world turned on him. Oh, a real Nazi! You like to get into the Canadian Parliament? Oh, what a horror! Well, you see, I'd just like people to cast their minds back. You see, just cast your mind back to a thing called the Treaty of Munich. And it was signed by the British, the French, the Polish and the Germans. Now what was happening was that Jews were carrying out a slaughter of people in the Sudetenland. Now there's absolutely no question about that. This is what was happening. It's all filmed, it's all on record. Everybody knows all about it. And word reached Hitler that this is what was happening, and he asked for permission to go into the Sudetenland to try to protect those German civilians who were suffering in much the same way as the people in Gaza are suffering right now, at this minute. Now, what sparked off this business in the Sudetenland? Well, I'll tell you. Russia did. Right, because the Russians were controlled by the Jews. Isn't that incredible? A whole bunch of Jews were in control in Russia. They were attempting to take control of all of Eastern Europe, and they did, finally, they did. Right, now, they gave Hitler permission. They signed a treaty with Hitler, Britain, France, and Poland. They all signed a treaty with Hitler, giving him permission to go through Poland. That was Hitler's problem, because if he'd gone into Poland, that would have been a declaration of war, crossing the Polish border with the German troops. So he got permission. And in he went. And when he was in there, he didn't attack Poland. His forces just passed through Poland. Right, now, when he was there, in Poland, helping to save the lives of the Sudetenland ethnic Germans, he spotted the Russians all lined up on the borders of Poland, ready to come in and take, in Hitler's terms, take control of Europe. They'd managed to get control of Russia. Now they were heading into Europe to take control of the rest of Europe. And Hitler sent Rudolf Hess over to speak to the British, and the British locked him up. Why? Why did the British lock him up? Because the British had already armed the Russians to the teeth. The job had already been done. The Americans had armed them as well. Now that tells you that at that point, Hitler and the German people had done absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nothing of any description could be laid at the door of the Germans and Hitler. A lot of us have been made ever since to say, oh, he was doing this. I listened to this Michael Jones last night, and he was laying down what the Germans were doing and all the rest of it, all sorts of horrible things happening. All this bloody business. Well, I don't know whether it was or whether it wasn't. There was no attack made against Hitler because of things he was supposedly doing to people in Germany. He had turned Germany into the richest country in Europe, with the best run government. The people were absolutely in love with the Hitler and his government, and you can see that from some of the images I've posted. Right, so they were the Russians, armed to the teeth by the British, on the borders of Poland. And as soon as Hitler had gone back into Germany, they set about slaughtering the Polish people. This was the Jews from Russia, slaughtering the Polish people. Now, you never hear too much about that, do you? Now, be honest, you just never hear too much about that. So Hitler went back, and as far as he was concerned, he'd had permission to go into the Sudetenland. He hadn't declared war on anybody. He just went back home. I'm not quite sure whether he took some refugees from the Sudetenland with him, but he went back to Germany. And there he sent Hess off to warn the British, and Hess never came back. Well, at that point, Hitler knew. He wasn't stupid. And he knew that the Russians were coming. He knew it, and sure enough, they'd already started to slaughter in Poland. So what did Hitler do? Well, he got ready for Operation Barbarossa. Right now, and that is the excuse that was used to kick off the Second World War against Germany. Now that's where we are now. Just you can take it from me that just about everything I've said is the absolute truth. There's no make-believe about it. It is the absolute truth. Right, well then the British brought their first force into Europe. And, Hitler wiped the floor with them, and they were all lined up on the beaches of France, waiting to be picked up on D-Day. You know, and all this bloody, was it D-Day? No, D-Day, no, it was evacuation day. And they were all taken back. All these little boats came across from England. Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It was never explained to the British people that the Germans had just been stabbed in the back by their government. They got rid of the man who signed the document called Chamberlain and put the greasy little fat man, Churchill, into his place. And Churchill was just a tool of Bernard Baruch, the man who was busily organising the war against the Germans in America with Roosevelt. So Germany was completely innocent in the Second World War. They had absolutely no responsibility for it whatsoever. However hard you try, you will not find any excuse for the attacks that were made against Germany. Now, what happened in Germany? Well, what happened in Germany is exactly what is happening in Gaza right now. Exactly the same routine. Murderous bombing, brutality of all sorts, just slaughter, slaughter, slaughter. Every city in Germany was crushed in exactly the same way as they're crushing the Gaza now. Now that war was under the control of Jews. Right? And they wanted to kill every single fucking German. That was their aim. They wanted to get rid of the German people. Take a look at the Talmud. It's all written in the Talmud and the bloody Chronicles of Zion, the Elders of Zion. It's all written. And they bombed the shit out of every city in Germany. Not content with that, the same scumbags, the British and the Americans, they then bombed the shit out of the north of France. Right, 65,000 French people were slaughtered by British and American bombs because they didn't give a fuck who got killed. They weren't coming to Europe to save anybody. They were coming to Europe to destroy Europe. That was their aim. That's why Russia was lined up on the borders of Poland, ready to start the takedown of the rest of Europe. They'd already started in all the countries like Hungary and places like that. They'd already started. The next step was to take Europe. And Hitler put a stop to it. And there they were, these people, they bombed the shit out of every city in Germany. Then they bombed the shit out of the north of France, 65,000 French people killed. More people killed by the British and the Americans than were killed by the Germans. Right, then they started going across France, raping the fucking women on the way. You don't hear too much about that. Right, now these are the wonderful people. They saved the world from the Germans. Right, well they're now doing it again. They're doing it to a little tiny speck of land called Gaza. And you just take a look at what they've already done to Gaza. Just take a fucking look at it. It's absolutely indescribable. And what's happening? Well, what Russia today is reporting is, oh, those poor French people, because some French people were killed by those naughty Hamas men. Well, depending on whose story you want to hear, that was the Jews sacrificing their own fucking people and other people to generate an excuse to do what they're doing now. They didn't give a shit any more than they gave a shit about bombing the French to pulp. Then when the Germans had already retreated, they were setting up more things that they could blame on the Germans. Oh, look at this catastrophic event that happened here and there. Oh, isn't it awful? Look what the Germans did. Nobody's ever managed to produce any evidence whatsoever of atrocities carried out by the Germans. They're forever trying to attach them to things that were happening in Eastern Europe that had absolutely nothing to do with the Germans. The Germans had the fucking people of Ukraine fighting alongside them. And that was this man in the parliament in Canada. The Ukraine had already been slaughtered by the bloody Russians, 25 million. That was the Jews in Russia. Jews, don't worry about it. 25 million of them had already been slaughtered and deported and everything else. And now the Canadians, under the control of Klaus Schwab, are standing up and ridiculing an old man, a 98-year-old man, who fought back against these scumbags in Moscow, who'd massacred 25 million of his people. I mean, the whole world has gone fucking crazy. It's gone absolutely fucking crazy. And now we can see what's happening. They want to grab this little tiny bit of Palestine that's left because they want it. They just want it. And they can do what the fuck they like to whoever they fucking like. And nobody stands up and does anything about it. Why? Because we're all controlled by them. That's why. And we need to wake up and learn from history. I mean, I'm not sure whether I've played this little clip before or not, but another glance at it won't hurt.
My village is a very beautiful one. It has a mountain full of trees of figs and grapes, and it faces the main road to Jerusalem.
This is a story about what happened here in 1948.
We are only 750 people, and everybody knows each other. I came from a big family. We lived a good life. We never expected to be massacred. It was a black spot in the history.
That history has been carefully concealed, purposefully distorted, and in the West, largely forgotten.
They put our village as an example with what they can do.
The massacre in this village was one of many in a series of catastrophic events that became known as the Nakba, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were violently displaced from their homeland in order to create the state of Israel.
In May of 1948, a new Jewish state, Israel, was born in a bath of blood.
The borders of Palestine have been changed forcefully over time. But historically, this region has been home to Palestinians for centuries, with hundreds of villages and thriving cities. One of them being the central city of Jerusalem, with holy sites important to Jewish, Christian, and Muslim people. By the late Ottoman Empire, Palestinians living here were overwhelmingly Muslim, with minority Christian and Jewish native populations too. But regardless of religion, Palestinians were often referred to as Arabs, people of the Arabic-speaking world, despite their distinctive culture.
Palestinians have long distinguished themselves as Ahl Palestine, or the people of Palestine. They developed a distinctive Arabic accent, they developed regional food, regional dress, and family ties.
But by the time World War I began, several key political forces were competing for control of these lands. First, there was a growing Arab political movement, looking for independence from the Ottoman Empire in hopes of a unified Arab state that would include Palestine. Then there were Zionists, a political group that had one main goal: the creation of a Jewish state. Zionism was a response to an increasingly brutal climate for Jewish people, particularly in Europe and Russia, where there was a massive wave of anti-Semitism, including large-scale attacks in the late 1800s and early 1900s. After briefly considering other areas for a new state, including Uganda and Argentina, Zionist leaders decided on Palestine because of its connection to early religious history. But there was a third key group with political interests here: the British. Control of the region would allow them to expand their spheres of influence and protect trade routes to India. During World War I, since both the British and the Arab independence movement wanted Palestine, they decided to go after the Ottomans together with an important pledge. Through a series of letters in 1916, an Arab leader and a British official agreed that if Arabs would help the British fight the Ottomans and give the British economic and other foreign privileges in Arab lands, in return, the British would recognize and support an independent Arab state. Soon, the Arabs started doing their part in revolting against the Ottomans, making it easier for the British to move in. But the next year, the British issued a new declaration and betrayed the Arabs.
In 1917, Lord Allenby conquered the Holy Land, and the Jews were promised a national home in Palestine.
Without consulting the native Palestinian population, the British issued what's known as the Balfour Declaration, supporting the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. So instead of supporting the idea of Palestine as part of a unified and independent Arab state, the British pledged to help secure this land for Zionists. It was a strategic move. This declaration opened up a pathway for Britain to gain power in Palestine,
under the guise that it was supporting the self-determination of another people, of a people in Palestine who don't reside there yet.
As for Palestine's majority Arab population, the declaration referred to them as non-Jewish communities, who would be given civil and religious rights, but not political rights. A few years later, after World War I ended, Britain gained control of Palestine through a mandate that also required them to put the Balfour plans for Jewish settlement in motion. And they did. Between 1922 and 1931, the Jewish population more than doubled. The migration helped the Zionist movement gain steam, and a slogan took off: a land without people, for a people without land.
And it sends a message to Western leaders that the people who had been living in Palestine for generations could just be easily moved elsewhere. The idea was that those inhabitants weren't a people with ties to that land.
Palestine was, of course, a land with a people. In 1931, there were more than 850,000 Palestinian Arabs in the region, still the vast majority. But with the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party in particular,
hate became a rallying call.
Jewish flight from Europe became even more urgent, and Palestine started to see the biggest wave of Jewish immigration yet. Violence broke out, rooted in tensions over land. Jewish settlers purchased swaths of fertile land and evicted tenant farmers, creating a crisis of hundreds of thousands of landless, dispossessed Palestinian Arabs. Though Palestinians fiercely rebelled against both British colonial forces and Jewish settlers, they were brutally crushed by the British.
They put in Palestine more troops to repress that rebellion than they had stationed in India at that time, all of India.
These troops killed thousands of Palestinians, including many of their leaders, and the British began training and arming Zionist militias to suppress the rebellion too. But the rebellion continued. So, in an attempt to prevent further Palestinian resistance, the British began to limit Jewish immigration into Palestine. This ended up angering Zionist extremists, leading to more violence. So, in 1947, after decades of trying to manipulate both Palestinian Arabs and Zionists to keep their control over Palestine, Britain gave up and handed the question of Palestine to someone else.
To the United Nations also came the problem of Palestine. In recent years, this small country had been the scene of disorder and bloodshed.
They figured, there is this new thing called the United Nations. Here, in your lap, Palestine, first gift. So, the United Nations has now to figure out, how do you disentangle this thing that the British helped create?
A UN Special Committee proposed the land be divided into two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state, with Jerusalem as a separate UN-controlled entity. It was called the Partition Plan of 1947. The plan shocked Palestinians.
We could not accept the partition plan because at that time the population we were almost 2-1.
But the plan proposed giving over half the land, and often the most fertile areas, to the Jewish state.
From a purely pragmatic perspective, the partition plan didn't make much sense for Palestinian Arabs.
That wasn't the only problem with the plan. Within this proposed area of the Jewish state were hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs, including both Muslims and Christians, who had lived there for generations.
On a moral level, the idea of making hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs minorities in their own homeland seemed unjust and unfair.
In November 1947, the UN put the plan to a vote. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, and after lobbying from U.S. leaders and Zionists, the UN voted in favor of partition.
And finally, a momentous decision to partition the Holy Land's 10,000 square miles.
Britain announced their mandate over Palestine would end on May 15, 1948, even as Palestinians continued to reject the UN's decision to partition the land.
After the partition took place, in 1947, we really were scared something might happen to us.
By the end of 1947, Zionists had several well-developed paramilitary forces, the largest one known as the Haganah, and more extremist militias like Irgun. On March 10th, a couple of months before the British mandate would end, the Haganah adopted what was called Plan Dalit, or Plan D. On paper, the main goal was to gain control of the Jewish state, as laid out in the partition plan, while also defending Jewish settlements outside of the borders. In reality, that's where the majority of these operations took place, outside of the UN's proposed Jewish state. Some carried out by Haganah and others by more radical militias. Many of these operations focused on isolating Jerusalem and the roads to it. A set of brutal instructions called for the destruction of Arab villages by setting fire to, blowing up, and planting mines, especially those population centers which were difficult to control. In case of resistance, it called for the population to be expelled outside of the borders of the state, villages emptied, and for the occupation and control of Arab villages along main transportation arteries. One of the most widely publicized village massacres happened here in Deir Yassin.
We lived in Deir Yassin, which is about 4 miles west of Jerusalem.
91-year-old Dawood Assad was there the day of the massacre and was 18 at the time.
We saw one night, the night before, there was movement of lights, armored trucks moving around, moving like this. So we know that something is wrong. That's why we knew that something is going to happen to our village.
On April 9th, forces executing Plan D.
Share this video widely. Israel is using American weapons to commit war crimes, and Zionist-controlled America refuses.
By morning, they attacked us. My uncles, they were shooting at them, and I was there, loading the gun for them and shooting. We fought about almost 2.5 hours. They found my uncle, and they put him on the wall, and they shot him 8 bullets in cold blood. My grandmother, she went in the village to see my mother. On her way, she got shot. My brother Omar fell from her shoulder to the floor, but the floor was a concrete one.
Dawood escaped through a trench.
I went down all the way down here like this. So about 4 hours walking to Jerusalem.
To this day, the archive of the Israeli army refuses to release many of the images and intelligence reports on Deir Yassin. But one UN report detailed circumstances of great savagery, including women and children stripped, lined up, photographed, and slaughtered. Roughly 100 people, largely children and the elderly, were killed in the village. As for Dawood, he later reunited with the group of Deir Yassin captives in Jerusalem, including his sister and mother.
My mother says, "Where is your Uncle Radwan?" He says, "He was shot." "Where is your grandmother?" He said, "He was shot, and Omar was with her." So everybody has a commotion, Where's Fatma? Where's Ibrahim? Where's Amaryam? Where is David? Where is Ahmed? Where is Ismail? I'm a dream about it,
News of what happened in Deir Yassin spread quickly, with far-reaching effects.
The Zionist militias used it as a propaganda tool to tell people about it everywhere. The idea was that if you don't leave, we will do to you what happened in Deir Yassin.
Stories came out about women being raped, about babies being killed, and induced a great deal of fear among the Palestinian Arab population, many of them fleeing as a result.
Jewish troops routed Arab forces from the city of Haifa.
After taking Deir Yassin, Zionist paramilitary groups cleared major cities, including Haifa and Jaffa, and took hundreds of smaller villages and towns too. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced to flee, pouring into neighboring states as refugees. Plan D became the blueprint for carrying out the ethnic cleansing of historic Palestine to make room for a new state. And on May 14th, the day before the British mandate ended, Zionists declared this state as Israel.
תוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
But the creation of Israel didn't end the Nakba. Neighboring Arab countries that were overwhelmed by Palestinian refugees immediately went to war with Israel.
Now united in a League of Arab States, they are insistent that the entry of refugees into Palestine must be ended.
The fighting lasted for months. Arab armies eventually lost while Palestinians continued to be killed and forced out throughout that time. Palestinians who fled often carried only enough to stay away for a few weeks, hoping they'd eventually return home.
A lot of them lock their doors, put their key in their pocket, and then move to safer ground. When you leave the house and you take your key with you, it's because you're planning to go home. In the case of the Palestinians, those refugees weren't allowed to return.
Refugees trying to return were often shot at. Zionist paramilitary operations also tried to prevent them from returning again by destroying the villages.
That act of preventing their return compounded the Nakba. So the Nakba is both the forcible displacement of Palestinians from their homes and lands and country, as well as preventing them to return once the fighting was over.
Palestinian society was dismembered, crushed. More than half of the Palestinian people became refugees, stateless, dispossessed of their land.
Over time, the State of Israel covered up the physical evidence of an Arab Palestine. Place names were often changed from Arabic ones to Hebrew ones. The Jewish National Fund embarked on a massive effort to plant thousands of acres of pine forests and recreational areas on top of hundreds of ruined Palestinian villages.
Even though these forests have now grown into big pine trees, Palestinians have not forgotten their homeland.
While we know that roughly 6,000 Israelis lost their lives in the violence of the Nakba, records for Palestinian deaths weren't kept. It's estimated to be around 15,000. By the end of the Nakba, roughly 750,000 Palestinians had been forcefully expelled, and more than 500 villages destroyed. Though the UN's partition plan allotted Israel 56% of the land, through the Nakba, Israel captured 78% of the land. It was everything except what's now known as the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. Today, that's up to at least 85% of the total area, turning 6 million Palestinians into refugees without a homeland. It's why, around the same time that Israelis are celebrating Independence Day, Palestinians are out protesting on May 15th, holding up keys as a symbol of the homes they lost and the hope to return. For them, the Nakba isn't just a moment in history. It's a catastrophe that never really ended.
I dream about it, you know. We lived a good life till 1948 when we were displaced.
Now listen, there's this other thing. There's this other thing going on, and it's this talk about this hospital that was bombed, and the Jews are trying to say that one of the bottle bombs, the bottle rockets from Gaza, killed all those people, hundreds of people, and left hundreds badly injured, and all the rest of it, and. People with half a brain are saying, well, no, it just isn't possible, because it's not only unlikely that the people of Gaza had anything in any way powerful enough to do the damage that rocket is supposed to have done. And one of these little things is like a fireworks night rocket going through the sky. It does virtually no damage at all. When it hits something, they just bounce off in the main. But they may have got something a little bit more powerful now, I don't know, because you can't trust what you've been seeing in recent times. Because, well, there's people who are wearing Israeli army uniforms, so we just don't know what's happening. But take a listen to this. This is a clip. I tried to record it, but it's incredibly difficult trying to do two things at the same time. So I thought I'd just play the audio.
Share this video widely. Israel is using American weapons to commit war crimes, and Zionist-controlled America refuses to act or condemn Israel. It was an American joint direct attack munition, a JDAM, that was used to kill and injure over 1,000 people at the Gaza Al-Ali hospital. Now watch a comparison between the sound of a US-made JDAM bomb used by American daytime forces coming in at over Mach 1 velocity and the sound of the JDAM guided munition that was used at night on the Al-Ahli hospital strike in Gaza.
Bombs away.
Did you hear that? The sound matches up exactly. This was an Israeli strike using an American-made JDAM bomb. A JDAM is a guidance kit that converts unguided bombs, or dumb bombs, into all-weather precision-guided munitions. Now, listen to the unique telltale sound of the supersonic weapon used on the Gaza hospital. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has said America is supporting arms procurement to benefit its military-industrial complex, and it has the ultimate responsibility for a strike on the Gaza hospital. The American people must take to the streets in mass protest and pressure their elected representatives to immediately demand the United States break off all relations with Israel, which President Kennedy was about to do in 1963, as Israel was covertly developing nuclear weapons at its Dimona facility in the Negev desert.
There's something crazy about this world. We went to war with Iraq because we thought they had nuclear weapons. But Israel, we've known that they've had them for the past 18 years. That's the Negev desert, and that's the Dimona reactor. The signs on the fence say no photography, and I'm not inclined to push our luck at the moment. 6 levels below ground, the Israelis had built a plutonium reprocessing plant, a nuclear bomb factory. To this day, Israel still refuses to acknowledge its existence. In 1986, Vanunu duped Israel's vaunted security apparatus and smuggled a camera into the secret Dimona plant. His photographs exposed the world's greatest nuclear cover-up. What he showed was that Israel's nuclear arms program was far bigger and much more powerful than anyone had even dreamt possible.
Enough material every year for 10 bombs.
The Israeli government simply lied. To this day, the Israeli government defends its actions. Yuval Steinitz is chairman of the Defense Committee in Israel's parliament. Why should the world tolerate you having nuclear weapons and not, say, Iran?
First, again, we never admitted to have such weapons. But the very comparison is, I must say, it's very insulting, and I tell you why. We suffered one Holocaust. We listened to our neighbors.
Is it because of the Holocaust that you should be allowed to have nuclear weapons?
You know what? This interview was finished now. Your attitude is so hostile.
Often when there is dissent expressed in the United States against policies of the Israeli government, people here are called anti-Semitic. What is your response to that as an Israeli Jew?
Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody is criticizing Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then they are anti-Semitic. And the organization is strong and has a lot of money, and the the ties between Israel and the American Jewish establishment are very strong, and they are strong in this country. As you know, they have power, which it's okay. They are talented people, and they have power, money, and media, and other things. And their attitude is Israel, my country, right or wrong, the identification. And they are not ready to hear criticism. And it's very easy to blame people who criticize certain acts of the Israeli government as anti-Semitics, and to bring up the Holocaust and the suffering of the Jewish people, and that justify everything we do to the Palestinians.
The Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Ben-Gurion, ordered Israel's intelligence agency Mossad to assassinate Kennedy as he was an existential threat to Israel by withdrawing weapons, intelligence, and the U.S. deterrence umbrella against Israel's Arab neighbors. Mossad used rogue elements in the CIA to kill Kennedy. Kennedy's recent declassified letters, cables, and communications detail the proof of what got him killed, yet the Jewish-dominated mainstream media in America is silent because it implicates Israel.
I will tell you that I found articles, not in any crackpot publication, but in very sophisticated publications saying, forget Lyndon Johnson, forget the CIA, forget Fidel Castro, Assad.
In 1963, the Americans were pressing Israel to inspect Israel's Dimona nuclear facility for nuclear weapons development capability. The Israelis stalled the Americans at every turn to conduct verification inspections. The Israelis refused. On June 15, 1963, Kennedy finally threatened to cut off relations with Israel and leave the Jews open to attack by Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. This is the recently declassified threat. On June 15, 1963, at 1:55 p.m., the Israeli Prime Minister, Ben-Gurion, received an urgent telegram letter from President Kennedy. This is the recently declassified letter never before shown in this form. The letter contained an existential threat to cut off Israel from its special relationship with the United States. This letter led to Kennedy's death sentence. In part, Kennedy wrote,
Washington's commitment to and support of Israel could be seriously jeopardized if it was thought that the U.S. government could not obtain reliable information on the Dimona reactor and Israel's nuclear intentions.
Kennedy further wrote, to push home his ultimatum to cut off Israel,
you fully appreciate the truly vital significance of this matter to the future well-being of Israel.
President Nasser of Egypt was pressing Kennedy over Dimona and threatening to bring in the Soviets into the region. Kennedy was extremely alarmed, as 8 months before, between October 16th and 29, 1962, the Americans and Soviets had come close to a nuclear exchange with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy's threat to cut off Israel could have led to a nuclear-armed Egypt and wider Middle East. Prime Minister Ben-Gurion resigned the next day on June 16, 1963, to buy time until something could be done about Kennedy for existentially threatening Israel by leaving it open to Arab attack and/or denying Israel the ability to develop nuclear weapons, which is what Dimona was really about. Ben-Gurion was using the Holocaust as the reason why Israel needed to be nuclear-armed. Kennedy wasn't buying it. This infuriated Ben-Gurion. After Ben-Gurion resigned, the new Prime Minister Levi Eshkol was equally pressed by Kennedy for Dimona inspections. Ben-Gurion's resignation had bought Israel a little time until something could be done about Kennedy. For good. Ben-Gurion set up Mossad in 1949. Assassinations is its specialty. On September 16, 1963, the Americans were tricked into believing they were given an inspection of Dimona. Kennedy was pressing hard for the Dimona inspection after Ben-Gurion resigned on June 16th. His resignation wasn't made public until 10 days later on June 26th. During this time, Ben-Gurion had ordered Israel's Mossad to assassinate Kennedy. 2 U.S. nuclear inspectors were sent to Israel by Kennedy to inspect Dimona. They were stalled while in Israel. They were given the runaround by the Israelis. This is a recently declassified report as to what happened in Israel during the inspection, which didn't happen. The inspectors were given a tour of the resort town of Eilat on the Dead Sea, instead of given access to inspect Dimona, which is why they were in Israel. This is despite the fact that one has to pass Dimona to reach Eilat. This Dead Sea visit was the day before the two American inspectors were due to return to America. On the way back from Eilat, the Israelis offered to stop at Dimona for an unofficial visit, to say hello to the Dimona director, who, conveniently, proved not to be there. The Americans were given a brief 45-minute guided tour of Dimona. They didn't choose what they saw or where they went. They didn't enter many buildings or sensitive areas. They were told this was just a quick courtesy call to say hello. They were later told this qualified as their inspection. They objected. The Israelis said they'd had their inspection tour to satisfy their mission. In any event, they assured the Americans there was nothing to see at Dimona. They had fulfilled their mission. They'd had their inspection of Dimona, and they should go home. It was a bait and switch on the Americans. A Jewish trick. Upon complaint, the Americans were offered a revisit of Dimona, but with all the previous stalling, time had run out for the two Americans. They were due to leave the next day. The two foolish American inspectors couldn't see they'd been lured into a trap by the Elliott deception and diversion. The two Americans went back to America and reported all good at Dimona. Kennedy was furious at the two American incompetent inspectors. He was angry at the Israeli trick. Kennedy now had mere weeks to live. Mossad would assassinate Kennedy on November 22, 1963. The Israelis had bought time to kill Kennedy directing the CIA, who Kennedy had threatened to break into 1,000 pieces. The newly installed U.S. president and Israeli asset, President Lyndon Johnson, would not press Israel over Dimona, as Kennedy had done. Nor would he threaten Israel existentially, as Kennedy also had done. President Johnson was Israel's man. The USS Liberty affair later proved it. Israel killed 73 American servicemen and wounded 171. There was a coup in Dallas on November 22, 1963, when Kennedy was assassinated. America has had a shadow Zionist government ever since. In 1998, Yuval Ne'eman, who had orchestrated the Eilat deception, acknowledged in his autobiography the trick he'd pulled off on the Americans. He boasted that when the United States continued to press for a visit, Ne'eman told them, "You just did it." With Kennedy dead, there was no more pressure on Israel over Dimona. Israel became nuclear-armed to threaten its neighbors and the world with its Samson option. A rogue nuclear-armed monster state was born. The motto of Israel's Mossad is, "By way of deception thou shalt do war." Until Americans can retake their government from Zionist control, they must insist that the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, and Anti-Defamation League, ADL, must be booted out of America, as these are ground zero for Zionist control of America. They lobby for Israel and refuse to register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, enacted in 1938. FARA requires certain agents of foreign principals who are engaged in political activities to register to be accountable and controlled. President Kennedy was pushing for these agents of Israel to be controlled under FARA, but was assassinated before he could finish the job. Now watch the following explanation that Israel has a policy colloquially called mowing the lawn, which is to target and kill women and children so their opponent loses the will to confront and combat Israel. This is America's so-called best friend and closest ally in the Middle East. Now watch in revulsion at the war crimes Israel is committing with American acquiescence. The American people must not stand for this.
Let's get an update on that breaking news that we just told you about. Reports that an airstrike has hit a hospital in Gaza. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Sikander Kamani joins us now live from Tel Aviv. Sikander, what can you confirm?
Well, Matt, as you say, reports have been emerging of an absolutely devastating Israeli airstrike hitting a hospital in Gaza City, the Al-Ali hospital, with local officials there saying that hundreds and hundreds of people have been killed. We know that hospitals right across Gaza have been overwhelmed in trying to treat patients, but they've also been filled with people who are just looking for a safe place to stay, who've set up their homes effectively inside these hospitals. So the hospital compound would have been absolutely packed. Now, the Israeli army says that they're looking into accounts of this, but this could well be a turning point in how this conflict is perceived.
The reports are confirmed that the Israelis bombed the principal hospital in Gaza and killed 500 people. Now, how can the Israelis possibly justify that?
Well, look, this isn't something new. Israel has a policy that's been in place since 2006. It was an unofficial policy prior to that. But after 2006, the war they fought with Hezbollah, where the Israeli military was beat, Israel came with a policy, and it's based on the principle of deterrence. It's called the Dahiwa policy. It's mowing the grass. And what it means is that Israel will respond with disproportional violence, not just against the fighters, but the civilians. That the whole idea is to break the support of the civilians for the fighters. So they will attack them. They will inflict overwhelming casualties. It's a war crime. It's a literal war crime. But the United States has known about this. The world has known it. Israel has published this. They bragged about it, but we just don't want to think about it. What happened in Gaza and what's been happening is part of this policy of Dahiwa, mowing the grass. And mowing the grass literally implies killing the children, culling them out, decimating them. So
these are war crimes committed with American military equipment and American ammunition.
100%. And again, under normal circumstances, if a nation took American equipment and did this, we would embargo them. We would sanction them. We would, tell them that you can't do this. But here it's Israel. Again, see, hear, speak no evil. We know what Israel's doing. We support what Israel's doing. This is why any talk of the United States of being sympathetic to the Palestinian population is a 100% lie. We've never been sympathetic to the population. We've always been embracing the Israeli point of view and the Israeli strategic objectives, even if it includes this policy of Dahiwa. Look, Israel published it. Google it. The papers are there. I'm not making it up. And when you read it, you're going to go, how could this be? Because we have been blind to the crimes committed by Israel against the Palestinians for over 7 decades.
Right now, so that all sounds very, sort of very open and frank, and yet it doesn't detract from what I've already said. The Americans are now arming Israel to do what they're doing to the Arab world, whereas the Americans and the British have already destroyed Iraq for the same people. They've ordered a war against Iran for the same people. They've attacked in Afghanistan for the same people, because Israel wants to take control of all and everything. And the British, the Americans, and the French, the Five Eyes or something they call them, that includes Canada, Australia, New Zealand, have been arming them all. So there's nothing happening now that hasn't been happening forever. They armed everybody to do it to Germany, and everybody just stood back and they just watched Germany being razed to the ground, flattened. Untold millions of German people were just slaughtered The German people are now brain dead because of what the French, the British and the Americans, in league with the Jews who now control Germany, they've controlled Germany, apart from a short period when Hitler was there, ever since the end of the Great War. Well, so the world is a funny place that we're living in, and shouting and bawling at the Gazan people for what they may or may not have done to a few bloody Jews, when we don't even know if what the Jews are telling us about what happened to them is reality. I mean, all this talk, everything was so neatly in place, a pop festival going on right on the border with bloody Gaza and all this nonsense. And then you see a few short clips of people being pushed into cars, could be happening anywhere. And then you see all these burnt out wrecks. While it's all going on, there's not a sign of smoke around or anything else. It all looks as if this is just conspiracy theory for once. It all looks as if it was all carefully laid out, and everybody knew what was happening. They had little clips made of people being pushed into cars. There's all blood daubed all over the place, and yet the Jews did nothing to try and stop it. They didn't even turn up. They've got every amenity going, and yet there's people there on smartphones. And Israel was only a heartbeat away, and yet nobody could come and help those people. Do you believe all that? It's pretty hard, isn't it? But I don't know. I mean, let's just have a little bit of a pause here. It's a sad fact the way everything is. Everything is repeating itself, and it's impossible to make people understand what's going on. I mean, once you spot it, you can't unspot it, if you see what I mean. It's as plain as bloody day. Like, I mean, my main idea for years has been that we're being run by the mafia, and nothing that I've seen happening has changed my mind about that. It's total criminals, killers, murderers, extortioners, robbers, whatever you want to call them, who are ruling everything. They are in charge of everything, including the mafia. I mean, you only have to listen to that guy at Dimona talking to that Australian journalist when he started to say something about. Does he think that the Jews should have atom bombs? And the guy started talking this talk about immediately starts talking about the Holocaust. Well, there was no Holocaust. You see, it's exactly the same routine. They control everything. So they put laws into place that they will come after you if you say something that they don't like. Well, their attitude has made it so confusing that nobody knows what was actually happening in Germany or in other places during the war, because so many claims have been made, things that have been, well, it wasn't quite like this, say the Red Cross, it wasn't quite like that, say the people of Poland, it wasn't quite like, and even as all that's going on, they're still arresting people. And they're still talking about anti-Semitism when, well, they're not Semitic people. And the Jews of all people don't even seem to know what a Semitic person is. And yet, you go to jail for that as well. And if you ask them, well, can you produce the Semitic person that was upset about something that I may have said? Well, they couldn't. Because there's no such thing. There may well be some such thing, like Jews that lived in Palestine, for example. There's a lot of Jews stayed in Palestine, and they may well have grown up speaking in a Semitic language in their home, home language, not a language they spoke as a second language. The language of their family at home could well have been a Semitic language. That's perfectly true. But in the main, it wasn't. And there were no Jews from the Middle East rounded up and taken away. I mean, why would they bother? They were sending Jews to Israel, so why would they bother to bloody round them up and take them back into Germany and put them in camps? It's rubbish. The ones that left Germany and went into Palestine didn't go into camps. So none of it makes sense, and yet we've all had to live a life where if anybody says anything naughty against the Jews, they're considered to be a bad person, and yet, just in Russia, they're guilty of at least 200 million slaughters themselves, brutal ones, brutal ones. Horrible things were done, and it's still happening. I mean, in Ukraine now, there's a huge organised theft of organs from dead people, and some of them may not have been dead. And it's that simple. They're criminals, they're crooks, they're arseholes, and they've been ruling us forever. They've even taken control of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has to operate now apart from Rome, because Rome is a dead duck. And so are the Jews. They haven't seen it yet. They're as thick as everybody else. They can't see it. They're going to be sacrificed. It's already. I came across some little thing this morning saying that this horrible little prat. Let's see if I can find him. Take a listen to this. This is that creepy little character, Ben Shapiro or some such thing. Have a listen to this. If it will play.
Watch as Ben Shapiro tells his audience that unless the United States provides Israel...
I mean, sadly, all these little clips are on Rumble, and Rumble is very, very slow. It takes. I'll just let it buffer up a little bit to see if that helps. It's only 3 minutes long, this thing, but I can't see the little trail coming out at the bottom yet. But anyway, let's see if it's going.
Material aid, Israel could find itself in a scenario where it's nuking its neighbors. Now watch.
So the real risk for Israel in not finishing off Hamas right now is that this is taken as a sign of weakness, as it certainly would be, by Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a far more dangerous terrorist group than Hamas. Hamas is a dangerous terrorist group. They just proved it by killing 1,300 Jews. Hezbollah currently has over 100,000 highly sophisticated rockets aimed directly at the north of Israel. Estimates suggest that were Hezbollah to fire all of those rockets, we wouldn't be talking about 1,300 dead Jews. You would be talking about somewhere between 20 and 30,000 dead Jews, day one. If Hezbollah gets in, Israel will have no choice but to unleash the Air Force. If they unleash the Air Force, they're not going to be worried at that point about civilian casualties at all. They're simply going to have to eviscerate the entire south of Lebanon and topple the regime in Lebanon that supports Hezbollah. If that happens, Iran undoubtedly gets in, and so does Syria. If that happens, and Israel is now faced with a full war in the north, combined with a war in the south, because they will not have defeated Hamas, that's the predicate. If Israel is forced to the wall, the possibility of nuclear exchange is extremely high. That is why it is very important that the United States provide the material aid.
Well, there you have it. Yes, the United States must provide all and everything to try and save their friends in Israel. Why? Why should they? They've already got 2 sitting duck aircraft carriers in the region. Some say 3.
To Israel?
Shapiro went on to say, if Israel is forced to the wall, the possibility of nuclear exchange is extremely high. Ben Shapiro is a close friend of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What Shapiro has done is confirm that Israel is a covertly nuclear-armed state. precisely what Israel accuses Iran of being. Israel refuses to permit the International Atomic Energy Agency to conduct inspections. When President Kennedy attempted to...
There you are. You've already heard all that. But you see, my viewpoint convinces me that they haven't got nuclear weapons. And that's just the way I feel. I don't think anybody has. That's why nobody seems to be bothered about it, do they? We all know that, Pakistan's got an atom bomb, yeah. Well, nobody seems to be worried about it, do they? India's got them, as far as I know. Nobody's worried about them because they haven't really got them. Word got out to certain people, look, don't worry about bombs. It's all a farce. It was all... take a look at... there's a book written about when they were making the bomb in El Alamos or wherever it was, and it was just a money-making racket. It was all being done by Jews, all of it. It was an absolute load of fucking tosh. And then when they were going to drop it on Japan, oh well, it wasn't ready, right? No, but we'll have to drop it on Germany. But they didn't drop it on Germany. But they were told, oh, they dropped 2 of them on Japan. It's a load of rubbish. No, what did I say? It was meant for Germany, but then they didn't get it ready. Germany had capitulated, and then they dropped them on Japan. And they didn't. You see, all the evidence shows that Japan was firebombed. There's not a trace of this huge amount of damage that's going to be done if one of these bloody atom bombs drops. Not a trace of it. Most of Nagasaki was left standing. It was firebombed, for Christ's sake. Most of the time was built with bamboo. All the solid buildings were still there. There's not a trace of trees being blown over. There were trees left standing and everything singed by the firebombs. It's all rubbish. I'm not. I don't worry about. I mean, I'm prepared to be wrong, but I hope I'm not. But I don't believe anybody's got them, and anybody who has got them, they'd be absolutely stupid to drop them. I mean, there's some evidence that something weird happened in the past, and that's what's created all these places like the Sahara Desert. All the places where all these amazing ruins are hanging out are all places that, for some reason, have been cut off. South America was completely cut off from whoever built all those marvelous buildings in South America, the same as the Egyptians, just vanished. There's every possibility that there was some terrible disease or whatever, I don't know. And then you've got this business that turned up in the lost history of the flat earth. There's all those kids that were running around with no adults. What was that all about? We don't know. I mean, I've been looking at those sort of images all my life, little kids working in factories. And I used to include it in my tirade against the blacks and whimpering about picking cotton. But then when that documentary came out and I started looking a little bit more closely at it, the reason that there were all children working in the cotton mills is because there were no adults to do it. So something happened. And it's not that long ago. For Christ's sake, it's not that long ago. It must be recorded somewhere. It's no good waiting for the people's version of what happened. There must be sort of record somewhere of it. And yeah, I've tried to track it down, but I can't find a thing about it. Not a mention. It's a sort of a taboo subject. But anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. I'll just check a piece of music. I'm sure I've got something here. I'll have a little pause to find it. I hope you enjoy this little number. I've lined up for you another Ry Cooder of one of the best albums in my collection. Thank you very much for your company, and I hope to be able to get this to upload.
When a fellow has the blues and feels discouraged and has nothing else but trouble all his life, when he's always grumbled at and never happy, living with a scolding, aggravating wife, if he's sick and tired of life and takes to drinking, do not pass him by, don't greet him with a frown. Do not fail to lend a hand and try to help him. Always lift him up and never knock him down. If he stays out late at night because he's worried, and because his home is not what it should be, it should be. Have a smile for him whenever you should meet him. It would help him just the right way, don't you see? And if he gambles when he's in the town or city, tell him what he ought to do to gain the crown. Lend a hand and do not fail to show him pity. Always lift him up and never knock him down. Cannot pay his debts, he feels disgusted. If he's blue and doesn't have a word to say, let him know you are his friend, can be trusted. It would cheer this lonely fellow on his way. If he finds it hard for him to keep his family, let a kind word greet his ear when he's around. Don't say anything at all to make against him. Always lift him up and never knock him down. If he has no friends and everyone's against him, if he's failed in everything that he has tried, try to lift his load to help to bear his burden. Let him know that you are walking by his side. And if he feels that all is lost, he is falling, try to place that poor